fourth grade. You've been doing a really nice job with your assignments. Next week we should be able to start with Google Slides instead of some of the documents and things. So watch for a video next week on how to submit your assignments the correct way. So that way I can see all the hard work you've been giving me. All right, so let's pick up where we left off with Super Fudge last night. Peter had to go down to Fudge's classroom because he was causing trouble. All right, let's see if your predictions about what he did were correct. All the kindergarten babies were busy. Some were building with blocks, others were painting, and a group was playing house in the corner. It was just the way I remembered kindergarten, but I didn't see Fudge anywhere. "Oh, Mr. Green," Mrs. Hildebrandt said, limping over to us. "I'm so glad you're here. I can't do a thing with him. He still refuses to come down." I looked up. Fudge was perched on top of the cabinets that were on top of the cubbies. He was stretched out, lying across the top, just inches from the ceiling. "Hi, Peter," he called, waving. "What are you doing up there?" I asked. "Resting. Come on down." "No, I don't like this school. I quit." "You can't quit," said Mr. Green. "Why not?" Fudge asked. "Because going to school is your job," Mr. Green said. "Otherwise, what will you be when you grow up?" "A bird," Fudge told him. Mr. Green laughed. "Creative, isn't he?" "I wouldn't necessarily call it that," Mrs. Hildebrandt said. "Why'd he climb up there in the first place?" I asked. "Well," Mrs. Hildebrandt said, "that is a long story." "Because she's mean," Fudge called. "M-E-A-N, mean." "Now, Mr. Green," Mrs. Hildebrandt said, "you've known me for a long time, and I ask you, have I ever been mean to a child? Knowingly, consciously, intentionally mean? Especially on the first day of school?" "She wouldn't call me Fudge," Fudge said. "That's why I had to kick her." "He kicked you?" I asked Mrs. Hildebrandt. She held up her skirt and showed me her bruised shin. "And I don't mind telling you," she said, "that I was in great pain. I almost passed out, right in front of the children." "Is that when he climbed up to the top of the cabinets?" I asked. "That is correct." "Because she wouldn't call me Fudge," Fudge said again. "It's not a proper name," Mrs. Hildebrandt said, "and it's not as if he hasn't got a proper name. He has. Farley Drexel Hatcher. I told him that I would call him Farley, or I would call him Drexel, or I would call him F.D., but she wouldn't call me Fudge." All the little kids turned around, and suddenly the room was very quiet. "That's right." Allie, sit down. "That's right," Mrs. Hildebrandt said. "Fudge is a good name for candy. It's not a good name for a boy." "I told you, I'm a bird," Fudge shouted. "There is something very definitely wrong with that child," Mrs. Hildebrandt said. "There's nothing wrong with him," I said. "My mother calls him Fudge. My father calls him Fudge. My grandmother calls him Fudge. His friend calls him Fudge. My friends call him Fudge. I call him Fudge. He calls himself Fudge."
I call my
"Yes, we
Fudge.
get the picture," Mr. Green said. "I can't imagine a parent actually deciding to call a child Fudge," Mrs. Hildebrandt said. "You don't know my parents," I told her. "Well, that's true, but I think what we have here is basically a personality conflict," Mr. Green said. "So I suggest that we transfer Fudge to Miss Ziv's kindergarten." "Splendid idea," Mrs. Hildebrandt said. "The sooner, the better."
The better.
"You can come down now," I told Fudge. "You're going to another kindergarten." "Will the teacher call me Fudge?" he asked. "As long as you want her to," Mr. Green said. "And will she let me use the brown blocks?" Mr. Green looked at Mrs. Hildebrandt. "I never let them use the round blocks on the first day. It's one of my rules." "You can't build anything good without the round blocks," Fudge said. "We'll ask Miss Ziff," Mr. Green told Fudge. "But we do have rules here, and you will have to obey them." "As long as I can use the round blocks," Fudge said. Mr. Green loosened his shirt collar and wiped off his forehead with a handkerchief. "Hurry up," I said to Fudge. "I'm missing important things upstairs." "Like what?" "Never mind, just get down."
Hurry up.
Fudge climbed down to the top of the cubbies, and Mr. Green reached up and lifted him the rest of the way down. "Goodbye, Farley Drexel," Mrs. Hildebrandt said. "Goodbye, rat face," Fudge said to her. I gave him an elbow and whispered, "Don't go around calling teachers rat face." "Not even if they have one?" he asked. "Not even then," I said. Mr. Green and I took Fudge next door to Miss Ziff's kindergarten. She was reading Arthur the Anteater to the kids. I could tell that Fudge was impressed. I know that story, he said. Arthur doesn't like to eat red ants. Mr. Green handed Miss Ziff's registration card. Miss Ziff Fudge's registration card. His name is Farley Drexel, Mr. Green said, but everybody calls him Fudge. Miss Ziff smiled at Fudge. I'll bet you're as sweet as your name, she said. I am, Fudge agreed. Just ask Mrs. Hildebrand, I said to myself. My brother's school career had begun.